Hello YouTube, welcome back. So sadly the bayonet project is currently defunct because my camera forgot it had an SD card and didn't actually record what I was doing. So I'm starting on a new project which is a reproduction of the Sutton Hoo axehammer. Now this is quite a unique object because it has an iron handle which is unknown anywhere else in Europe with regards to axes of the period. Now the handle itself transitions from round to almost square to flat section. And the use of the axe hammer is quite heavily debated. Some people say it's a weapon, some people say that it is a shipwright's tool, and some people say that it was for slaughtering cattle. Me personally, I would go with slaughtering cattle, purely because it was found near feasting implements. And just out of interest, here is its location vis-a-vis the cooking chain which we made a little while back. So we're going to be forging this out of wrought iron, which is a similar material to what was used at the time. This is a piece of 30mm round. So we're going to start off by forging the round section, which is 20mm round, according to my calculations. So we will get some heat in there, and I'm going to do most of this under the power hammer because it makes it a lot easier for me, and I only have a day to do this. So we will just reduce that section down by as much as we need, and we're looking to get it 250mm long. And I am being a little bit rough with this. I'm not trying to get a smooth, perfect finish, purely because the original one wouldn't have had a smooth, perfect finish. There's no sign that it was filed or polished or anything, which again leads me to believe that it was more of a tool than a weapon, because Anglo-Saxon weapons were usually quite highly polished. So here we can see that the 20mm round has been drawn out to a length of 250mm. So next we are going to do a rectangular section which is 20 by 15. So again we'll do that under the power hammer. And I will work on the transition a little bit. Sadly there wasn't a top view of the axe in the book which I'm using, which incidentally, if any of you are interested in the Sutton Hoo excavation, is a very good book. It's entitled The Sutton Hoo Ship Burial. So as you're forging this down, keep checking your dimensions. I've set 2 calipers, one for thickness, one for width. And I'll just keep, between heats, offering these up to the work, just to check that I am staying within dimensions. And with the flat section, I'm actually going to forge it a little bit thicker than it needs to be. And then I will actually finish it off, take it down to its final size with a hand hammer. And that is purely to avoid the nice smooth power hammer marks, because the original one of these presumably would have been forged by a smith with possibly a couple of strikers. And currently I'm not aware of the Anglo-Saxons using flatters. I don't think they were too worried about hammer marks in their work. So that is what I am going for. So check the dimensions. So basically the power hammer is to reduce the work by as much as possible, but then I will hand finish this. And the length of this 20 by 15 needs to be 200mm, which I have achieved here. So the next part is the flat section, which was 5 by 30mm. So again, under the power hammer, and because of the length of the bar, I will have plenty of excess material on this, which is absolutely fine. It's better to have too much material than too little. And again, I will take it down to its final dimension with a hand hammer. Now, I'm not giving this what we'd call a pub finish. I'm not deliberately putting hammer marks in it to make it look handmade. I am forging it as flat and as clean as I can. So the next stage I will do this transition, which as you can see is a nice radius transition between the 30x5 and the 15x20. So for this I'm going to use my rounding hammer. I'm going to put the spine of the handle flat on the anvil. Now the Anglo-Saxons did actually have variations of the rounding hammer. Some of them look like doghead hammers, and then they had their sledgehammers, which were also on occasion shaped like rounding hammers. So I'm fairly sure that this is the way they would have done that transition. So I'm just dressing it in and then dressing the thickness out. And again, I'm trying to avoid too many hammer marks while still keeping that hand forged effect. And here we have the blank for this iron handle. With a chalk line where it needs to be cut off. So at the cut-off point I will just take my chisel and just put some marks in there to save losing the chalk in the fire. And then I will literally just come over to the cutting plate, chisel most of the way through the iron. So iron is a lovely soft material for this kind of work, so it doesn't take too long. So start cutting on the face of the anvil and then use the edge of the cutting plate to just shear that material off. And at the end I need to do a double set down about 50mm from the end of the bar to fit into the axe head itself. So I've got some shoulders to rest the axe head on. You'll see what I mean in a minute. So I will carefully measure where the axe head starts. I have given myself a little bit extra material, so I will mark off where that extra material starts and measure back from that. And that there is where the shoulders need to be. Now as I'm doing this as a double set down, it will draw out the material, but it is better to have too much than too little. So by hand, and I could have done this under the power hammer, it would have been a bit easier, but I was quite keen to do this bit by hand. I will do the double set down with the edge of the hammer matching the edge of the anvil, like so. And I'm not too worried about it being a little bit radiused on the shoulders because we can tap the axe head onto it and that will square off the shoulders afterwards, so it isn't necessary at this stage to have perfectly square shoulders. Equally, you could file the shoulders square if you wanted, or you could use a blacksmith's helper or something like that, but I am trying to do this as authentically as I can get away with. I know I was using the power hammer, but the power hammer is replacing strikers, so I'm not too worried about that being inauthentic. So just square out the material and get it an even thickness. And here we have the tenon which will go inside the axe head. It's a little bit uneven now, but we can sort that out a little bit more once we have the actual axe head. So I also noticed that there is a curve in the handle, which I'd not noticed in other reproductions, so I'm going to add that curve in, because I doubt very much it happened to it in the ground whilst it was waiting to be excavated. I think it is a deliberate design on the handle, possibly to give it a bit more momentum. If you look at war axes of the period, they do tend to have curved handles, and I worked out that the lift was about 35mm at the end of the handle, so I'm working to that. You can see the look of concentration on my hairy face. So then give it a little bit of a quick straighten up. And here we have the blank with the curve and the tenon on the end. So at this stage we're going to move on to the ring. Now, in the book that holds this illustration, I see no indication of it being a swivel ring. However, I have seen in other places that it was actually a swivel ring. But I haven't managed to find the source of this. But I am going to put a swivel ring in there anyway because it's quite interesting. So to start with, I am going to drive a punch into the end of the bar, of the handle. And then I will even out the thickness of the cup that I have thus created. Now I sat down and I thought about how to do this swivel for quite a long time, and I think that this is quite a plausible way of doing it. It would be quite interesting to see some x-rays of the original axe handle to see how the Anglo-Saxons did it originally, and I'm reasonably confident it would have been a similar manner. So you end up with this cup like so, which is relatively even, as you can see. So at this stage I will heat up the end, and with a ball peen I will start upsetting the end of the bar, and the purpose of this is to create a lip which is going to come into and enclose the cup. As you can see, it's going to shrink the opening down and give us a 6mm to 8mm fixing hole whilst leaving quite a large cavity on the underside. I think you can probably see where I'm going with this. Like I say, it did take quite a lot of thinking, and I sat there staring at it for at least 45 minutes. So I'll just try and dress some of that swelling out at this stage and neaten it up a little bit. And on the samples I did actually do this pocket on the swivel itself rather than the handle. But I'll talk a little bit more about that afterwards. So keep dressing. So for the swivel itself, I have another piece of wrought iron, which I will then forge down under the power hammer to around 20mm round. And this is in order to make it match the thickness of the handle. And then what I will do is I will, still using the power hammer, start forging out the tenon which will hold it inside the handle. I'm doing this quite warm because I don't want to split the wrought iron, and I'm looking for a diameter of about 8mm. Like so. So at this stage I will cut off excess material. It's a little bit fiddly with this because of where the weights are. I'll just shear it over the edge of the anvil. Could equally have grabbed a pair of tongs and wiggled it off. But the tongs were at least 4 foot away and I couldn't reach them. I was too lazy to move. So with that cut off, just dress the damage that you'll have done with the chisel, and then I will use my bolster plate to just get a square shoulder around that tenon. Now I think it's the Meestermeer find which was a blacksmith's toolbox that was dropped in the lake by accident or deliberately. And I believe from memory there were bolster plates in there, so this is a perfectly reasonable thing to do to square off those shoulders. So once you squared it off, obviously you'll have upset your bar a little bit, so I will just spend a little bit of time forging that out. Probably could have gone a little bit quicker if I'd done it under the power hammer, but there we are. Just want to get that nice and round. So then I will return to the power hammer and I will start forging down that shoulder that you see on the original. Now with this, I left the shoulder quite thick. I could ideally have done with the shoulder being half the thickness. So I may remake this at some stage, I'm not sure. Purely in order to make it more accurate to the original. And we end up with something like this. So at this stage I will just get a little bit of heat in the end of the handle, and I will take the swivel and I will just feed it into that hole and make sure that it is spinning freely, and all this is doing is just wearing down the hot material in the handle. So you can see from the wiggle that I do have a nice big cavity in there. So the next thing I will do is I will trim down that tenon, and I want it to be just so that there is a gap of maybe 8 to 10 mil. Now in hindsight I could have done with it being a little bit longer, you will see why afterwards. I could probably have done with maybe 20 mil even of material. So at that stage I will just heat up the end and I will bang it in there. And the idea is that the end of the tenon will upset and will wedge itself in the cavity. So, and the cavity was actually quite big, so what I should have done is made that tenon a little bit bigger. But to release it and make it swivel freely, I will then just spin it around. As you can see, that works quite well for the moment. We'll talk more about it in a second. So the next thing I do, and I think this was my first mistake, is I will do a double set down in order to punch the fixing hole in there. Now I should have done this beforehand because I did manage to do the double set down, but it wasn't particularly pretty because of the wobble in the swivel. And also what it did was it actually loosened the tight fit of the swivel into the handle, which was quite annoying. So then cut off your excess material and using a hot punch, just punch a hole in there. So start one side. And then flip it over. Now I only actually punched halfway through, it makes it a bit easier to shear the material. And then punch halfway through the other side, and that will shear the material without leaving any flashing around the outside of the hole. And then using a bolster plate, I will just drive out that slug relatively easily. Now, because I didn't clean up the end, I need to just take off those devil horns. So to do that, I will just come over to my fine bick, my bickern rather, and I'll just knock in those devil horns to make a rounded punched hole. And there we have it. Now you can see it is quite loose because of the work I did to it, and it's not looking particularly attractive either. Here's one of the samples I made, and you can see that that is sitting nice and flush. So the swivel does work, however, on the axe handle, so there's always that. And then it equally works on the sample that I made to test my theory. And you can see that that is much tighter, so what I might do is remake that, do it a bit closer to the original, punch the hole first, then fix it to the handle with a bigger tenon. And then hopefully it should fit nice and tight on there. But in any case, here it is, droopy swivel, and the handle is pretty much completed. I will still need to do a little bit of work on the tenon, but that will have to wait till the axe head is done. So, thanks a lot for watching, I hope you've enjoyed it. Sorry, this is an axe, not a bayonet. There we go. So, many thanks to my wonderful donors on Patreon who have been quite patient with me the last month, in spite of my technical problems. Hopefully it won't happen again for a little while longer now. So thanks a lot guys for supporting me on the channel, and I will see you all on the next one next week.